Today, it's no joke, the DFA Daily to the 1st of April 2021. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. There was a big data drop today, so I want to go through some of the critical highlights and also look at some of the recent regulatory action, as well as what's going on over in the US. So we'll start with the ABS data. We had a slew of data today from the ABS. Retail turnover was down 0.8% in February, though still up 9.1% compared to February 2020. The volume of turnover dropped by around 200 million to 30.3 billion compared with last month. Across the categories, food retailing fell 3%. Other retail fell 0.4%, while household goods rose 0.7%, with electrical goods up a hefty 2.4%. Cafes, takeaway and food services rose 1.1%, and that was driven by a return to cafes and restaurants up 2%, offset by a fall in takeaway, and I guess that's because things have reopened. Clothes, footwear and personal accessory retailing rose 1.6%, and department stores were up 2.2%. Across the states, WA dropped 5.4%. Victoria was down 3%, the Northern Territory down 2.8%, while New South Wales rose 1.2%. Queensland was up 1.1%, and Tasmania was up 0.7%, with ACT up 0.5%, and South Australia up 0.2%. And finally, the original estimate for chains and larger retailers fell 13.4% in February, compared with smaller retails, which fell 5.5% in February. And meanwhile, new loan commitments for housing fell 0.4% to $28.6 billion in February. That's seasonally adjusted. This is the first fall since May 2020. However, exceptional growth in recent months saw commitments remain close to record highs. The ABS said the value of new loan commitments for owner-occupied housing fell 1.8% in February 21, although it remains 55.2% higher than in February 2020. The fall in February was driven by reduced loan commitments for existing dwellings, although the value of these loan commitments actually remained 39.7% higher than in February 2020. The value of loan commitments for the construction of new dwellings rose again, another 4.4% higher, and that's continuing a period of record rises since July 2020. And although the HomeBuilder grant, which was introduced in June 2020, was reduced from the 1st of January 21, it was made more widely available to borrowers in New South Wales and Victoria through increased price caps on new build contracts. And the time taken to process home loans means that construction loan applications made in late 2020 prior to these changes also contributed to loan commitments reported in February. The value of new loan commitments for investor housing rose 4.5% to $6.9 billion in February, again season adjusted, to be 31.6% higher than in February 2020. So expect to see all the media now spruiking that investor lending is back. The ABS said investor lending continued an unbroken period of growth since reaching a 20-year low in May 2020. The number of owner-occupied first home buyer loan commitments fell 3.3% to 16,117 in February, and that's the first fall since May 2020. However, commitments remained at historically elevated levels. Compared to February 2020, the number of owner-occupier first home buyer loan commitments rose by 65.8%. Across the states overall, there was a 4.9% fall in New South Wales and a 2.8% fall in Queensland, and that drove the fall in owner-occupied housing loan commitments nationally. All the other states, with the exception of the ACT, rose, with commitments in Victoria rising 4.2%. And finally, the value of new variable rate loan commitments funded in the month rose 8.5%, while the value of new fixed loan commitments funded in the month rose 9.9%, and the value of new variable rate loan commitments for first home buyers funded in the month fell 6%, while the value of new fixed rate loan commitments to first home buyers funded in the month fell 8.2%. And so again, I want to just underline the difference between loan commitments and loans funded, because the two are not the same. Now also, APRA has just published the last of their loan deferral data. They say as at the 28th of February, according to data submitted by the ADIs with over $20 million in loans subject to repayment deferrals, there was a total of $14 billion worth of loans on temporary repayment deferrals, which is around 0.5% of total loans outstanding, down from $37 billion or 1.4% of total loans outstanding in January. Housing loans make up the majority of total loans on repayment deferrals and have a higher incidence of deferral, with 0.7% of those loans subject to deferral compared to 0.5% for SME loans. As expected, they said, exits from deferrals continue to significantly outweigh entries into deferral, with $22 billion in loans expiring or exiting deferral and less than $500 million entering or being extended. But it is worth noting there are still some new loans coming in. Victoria remains the state with the highest proportion of loans subject to deferral at 0.7%, compared to the rest of the country at 0.4%, though this difference, they say, tightened in February. As temporary loan repayment deferral programs are coming to an end, APRA is discontinuing its statistical publication, with this February edition being the final publication of the data. Information on the ongoing performance of ADI lending, including non-performing loans, will be available in future editions of APRA's regular quarterly statistical publications, which comes out about 2 months after the end of the quarter. So we won't see much over the next few months. But the clock is now running again on mortgage defaults. So let's see what the stats look like in 3 to 6 months' time. Now, over in the US, President Joe Biden reveals a $2.25 trillion US infrastructure plan paid for by tax hikes on businesses. And his administration said this will prove the most sweeping since investments in the 1960s space program. The 4-part, 8-year plan dedicates $620 billion for transportation, including a doubling in federal funding for public transport. It will provide $650 billion for initiatives tied to improving the quality of life at home, like clean water and high-speed broadband. And there's $580 billion for strengthening American manufacturing, and some $180 billion of which goes to what's billed as the biggest non-defense research and development program on record, and $400 billion to address improved care for the elderly and people with disabilities. Biden's plan would increase the corporate income tax rate to 28% from 21% and set a 21% minimum tax on global corporate earnings. The White House said tax increases will be fully paying for the investments in this plan over the next 15 years. But the proposal faces a rough road in Congress. Garnering Republican support in either the House or the Senate, both of which Democrats control by narrow margins, will be difficult, if not impossible. Corralling moderate and progressive Democrats will also be a challenge. Like great projects of the past, the president's plan will unify and mobilize the country to meet the great challenges of our time, the climate crisis and the ambitions of an autocratic China, the White House said in a statement before Biden's speech in Pittsburgh. What Biden laid out is just the first part of his long-term economic program, with a second round of initiatives to be announced in mid-April. Those will focus on helping families with the challenges like healthcare costs, childcare and education. And the program will prove far more complex to enact than the $1.9 trillion pandemic relief bill signed earlier on in March. Republicans are staunchly opposed to tax increases, and the breadth of measures will invite partisan and even internal Democratic battles. Senator Republican leader Mitch McConnell said on Wednesday, "It's like a Trojan horse that's called infrastructure. But inside the Trojan horse is going to be more borrowed money and massive tax increases on all of the productive parts of our economy." And National Economic Council Director Brian Deese said that the programme, even with higher levies on companies, will aid the private sector. These public investments are among the highest returning investments in terms of spurring private investment, he said in an interview with Bloomberg TV on Tuesday. "Let's have a competitive tax system that encourages domestic investment," he also said, arguing that the proposal will stop a race to the bottom internationally on business taxes. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told her caucus members on Monday that she aims to move the infrastructure bill through her chamber by July the 4th, though it could slip to later that month, according to a number of sources. That timeline could allow for the Senate to pass the final version before Congress's month-long August recess. As seen with the COVID-19 bill, Biden's initial plans are coming in much bigger than those economists had anticipated. The shift to a major expansion in fiscal policy has already driven up forecasts for growth this year and sent the Treasury yields climbing. While stocks have reacted with some volatility in recent weeks, the S&P 500 index hit a record high on Friday. Biden's plan will create millions and millions of jobs, an administration official told reporters, while declining to provide a specific figure. The outline of the package emphasises new union jobs and makes it easier to unionize. Biden was speaking in Pittsburgh, a city the White House views as a prime example of an old manufacturing hub revitalized by new industries from healthcare to technology. The administration wants the same type of reorientation that Pittsburgh saw to provide fresh opportunities to working-class cities and towns across the country. The plan envisions an expensive political gambit carried out over the next decade to try to create well-paying jobs by both updating the country's infrastructure and preparing for the coming weather patterns wrought by climate change. A major undercurrent through the infrastructure plan is addressing inequality and expanding help for segments of society that the administration judges have been left out in the past. For example, in addition to fixing the 10 most economically significant bridges in the country that needed construction, there's $20 billion for a new program that will reconnect neighbourhoods that were cut off by past investments, such as the 181 highway, and all lead pipes will be replaced to address water quality issues. Another key theme is bolstering US competitiveness against China. There's $50 billion earmarked for domestic semiconductor manufacturing and $40 billion more in upgrading research capacity in laboratories across the nation. Climate change is also a major target. The transportation funding proposed specifically directs $174 billion to electric vehicles, including sales rebates and tax incentives for consumers to buy American-made cars. While infrastructure has traditionally been a bipartisan endeavour, Republicans have warned they're not in favour of the major tilt towards renewable energy in the administration's approach. McConnell also said his party wouldn't vote for tax increases. Administration officials said Biden is open to input from members of Congress of both parties on what provisions should be in the final package and how to pay for them. And the White House expects to have robust outreach to GOP lawmakers and is committed to a serious discussion with them, a White House official said, on the condition of anonymity to discuss the administration's plans. That effort began with inviting Republicans from relevant committees, but Biden's plans actually don't necessarily need Republican support to become law. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Pelosi could choose to fit many of the president's proposals into one or more budget reconciliation bills, which require only a simple majority vote in the Senate. The challenge is, as Pelosi has already indicated, not all elements, though, could fit into such a bill, which sets certain requirements for inclusion. And meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is actively working on a central bank digital currency, and some prototypes are near completion. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, plan to unveil 2 prototypes of a digital dollar as early as July. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said last week, as part of an event held by the Bank for International Settlements on central bank digital innovation, that the US Central Bank is actively exploring the launch of a digital dollar. They plan to unveil their research as soon as July, said James Kuna, who leads the project for the Boston Fed. And he told Bloomberg the Boston Fed and MIT hope to unveil some of their work in the third quarter, including at least 2 prototype software platforms that could move, store and settle transactions made with digital dollars. Once the prototypes are released, others will be able to see and build on the code, he explained. There are major issues that the central bank, the Treasury and Congress must address regarding the digital dollar, he said. These include whether the Fed should host customer accounts itself, whether to allow anonymity, and what protection consumers would have in the case of a cyber attack or erroneous transactions. And he added that the Fed's work is meant to show what's possible without taking a stand on these major issues. We think it's important that we do not wait for the policy debate, because then we'll be a year or so behind, he said. This will take significant outreach to the industry and serious debate. Fed Chair Powell said the central bank would fully adopt a digital dollar only with the support of the nation's elected leaders. In February, he said that the digital dollar is a very high priority project for the Fed. We would need buy-in from Congress, from the administration, from broad elements of the public. And Powell emphasized last week, adding, "We would not proceed with this without support from Congress, and I think that would ideally come in the form of an authorizing law rather than us trying to interpret our law to enable this." Now, back here in Australia, the regulators have been very busy. APRA has increased Macquarie Bank's liquidity and operational risk capital requirements in response to multiple material breaches of APRA's prudential and reporting standards. The enforcement action relates to the incorrect treatment of specific intragroup funding arrangements for the purposes of calculating capital and related entity exposure metrics, as well as multiple breaches of APRA's reporting standards on liquidity between 2018 and 2020. These resulted from deficiencies in Macquarie Bank's ability to manage the operational risk inherent in the complex intergroup structure within which it transacts with its related entities. The breaches are historical and do not impact on the current overall soundness of Macquarie Group's capital or liquidity positions. However, they raise serious questions about the bank's risk management practices and the ability to calculate and report key prudential ratios. So as a consequence of the breaches, APRA will require Macquarie Bank to hold an operational capital overlay of $500 million, reflecting deficiencies in its management operational risk inherent in the bank's intergroup structure. A 15% add-on to the net cash outflow component of its LCR calculation, and a 1% adjustment to the additional stable funding component of its NSFR calculation. The increases in Macquarie Bank's capital and liquidity requirements will take effect from 1st of April 2021, and in addition, APRA will require Macquarie Bank to resubmit and restate selected regulatory returns. APRA Deputy Chair John Lonsdale said APRA's legally binding prudential and reporting standards play an essential role in enabling APRA to adequately monitor risks to financial safety and stability. For one of the country's largest financial institutions to have committed breaches of this nature is disappointing and unacceptable. Alongside the enforcement actions, APRA will subject Macquarie Bank to intensified supervision to address the bank's persistent difficulties in complying with its prudential obligations. We cannot rule out further action as more information comes to light about the root causes of these breaches, Lonsdale said. And ASIC has commenced civil penalty proceedings in the federal court against CBA, alleging that it charged monthly access fees to customers when it was not entitled to do so. Between at least 1 January 2010 and the 11th of September 2019, CBA's terms and conditions stated that CBA would charge a monthly access fee of between $4 and $6. CBA's terms and conditions also stated that a waiver would apply where a customer met specific criteria. For example, if a minimum amount was deposited into the account each month, or if the customer was a student. CBA received approximately 14,000 complaints from customers about the fee overcharging from June 2010 to May 2019. CBA first identified problems with its systems which caused the overcharging in January 2011. And CBA notified ASIC in December 2018 and lodged its first of a number of breach reports with ASIC in May 2019. Why did it take so long, you might ask? CBA has undertaken remediation for the majority of customers impacted by the incorrect fee charging. As of December 2020, CBA has paid almost $66 million in remediation to almost 1 million customers who were overcharged, and there are some customers who have not been remediated, and CBA has not paid components of compensation or interest for some customers. ASIC alleges that between 1 January 2010 and the 11th of September 2019, CBA incorrectly charged monthly access fees to customers who were entitled to fee waivers because they met certain criteria under their contracts with the bank. Almost $55 million in fees were charged to nearly 1 million customers and more than 800,000 accounts. For the period between 1 April 2015 and the 11th of September 2019, the period for which the court can impose a penalty, ASIC alleges that CBA incorrectly charged monthly access fees on approximately 2.4 million occasions, totaling around $11.5 million. And ASIC alleges that CBA incorrectly charged monthly access fees to customers entitled to fee waivers due to systems and processes that were inadequate or improperly configured in 30 different ways, as well as due to manual errors made by CBA staff. ASIC also alleges that each time CBA charged the fees or notified a customer via bank statements of the charging of each fee, it made false or misleading representations that it was contractually entitled to charge the fee when it was not. And further, ASIC alleges that each time CBA entered into a contract with a customer to establish an account where a fee waiver may apply, it made false or misleading representations that it would have adequate systems and processes in place to provide the fee waivers when it did not. By engaging in this conduct, ASIC alleges that CBA also engaged in misleading or deceptive conduct and contravened its obligations as an Australian financial services licensee to comply with financial services law. And ASIC also alleges that CBA failed to provide financial services efficiently, honestly, and fairly by failing to apply monthly access fee waivers to customer accounts after it had represented that it would do so, failing to maintain systems and processes that were capable of meeting obligations to customers, and failing to undertake an appropriate review of the multiple systemic issues that contributed to the ongoing failure of its systems to apply monthly access fee waivers in accordance with the bank's contract with its customers. ASIC commenced this proceeding because financial institutions need to have robust compliance systems to meet their obligations to customers, and financial institutions need to put customers first, and customers should have confidence that the banks they deal with charge fees correctly. The proceedings will be listed for a case management hearing on a date yet to be set. And separately, ASIC has also made a product intervention order banning the issue and distribution of binary options to retail clients. A binary option is a cash-settled, over-the-counter derivative entered into by two counterparties, and the binary option issuer and the client. The all-or-nothing payout under a binary option contract is determined by the occurrence or non-occurrence of a specific event in a defined time frame. This can include an event related to movements in the price of a financial product or a market index, for example, the price of gold increasing in 30 seconds, or an economic event such as a central bank interest rate decision. The ban will take effect from Monday the 3rd of May 2021 after ASIC found that binary options have resulted in and are likely to result in significant detriment to retail clients. ASIC reviews in 2017 and 19 found that approximately 80% of retail clients lost money trading binary options. ASIC found that binary options are likely to result in cumulative losses to retail clients over time because of their product characteristics. The all-or-nothing payoff structure, where one of two possible outcomes for a binary option contract is that the retail client will lose their entire investment amount. Short contract durations, the average contract duration of binary options traded with one provider was less than 6 minutes, and negative expected returns, that is, the present value of the expected payoff for a binary option contract, is lower than the initial investment. Commissioner Armour said binary options product characteristics make them incompatible with investment or risk management used by retail clients. ASIC's product intervention order will protect retail investors from these harmful products at a time of heightened vulnerability. ASIC estimates that retail clients' net losses from trading binary options were around $490 million in 2018. The size of the market in Australia has since reduced significantly after ASIC issued a warning in April 2019 against providing unlicensed or unauthorised services to clients located in several foreign jurisdictions. Australian retail clients are estimated to have made losses in net terms of more than $6.7 million in 2019. ASIC's binary option ban brings Australian requirements into line with prohibitions in force in compatible markets and follows the commencement on the 29th of March 2021 of ASIC's product intervention order imposing conditions on contracts for difference offered for retail clients. The order will remain in force for 18 months, after which it may be extended or made permanent. Civil and criminal penalties apply to contraventions of the product intervention order. Now, according to the New Daily, rampant demand in the renovation and home building sector is hitting customers with significant delays and pushing up the price of materials. And disruptions to international supply chains are only making matters worse. There are stock shortages in just about everything, said Duncan Eady, owner of Victoria-based Cumberland Building and Maintenance. Everything comes in from overseas, and all of these overseas countries have been in lockdown, so we just don't have the stock at the moment. As a result, many builders are worried they will be unable to fill the commitments they have made under the federal government's HomeBuilder program, which, as of mid-March, has doled out 96,726 grants. The scheme remains open to applications until April the 14th, but requires eligible projects to be started within 6 months of the contract date, which must be no later than March 31. Peter Langfelder, director of HomeBuilder's Metricon, described the scheme as a fantastic stimulus that has lifted his company's sales 20% higher than pre-COVID levels. Langfelder told the New Daily that Metricon was very confident it would begin all of its projects within the required 6-month timeframe, as it had good relationships with its suppliers. But he said many other builders were in a less fortunate position. There's no doubt the take-up of this has been substantial. It's fantastic. It's a great news story, he said. But I know from an industry point of view, there are some concerns in terms of being able to meet all the obligations of the customers. The industry is definitely under pressure. The Metricon director said he knew a developer who was struggling to get one of his sites ready in time as a result of heavy rainfall in recent weeks. There are some customers there that have signed up under the pretense that they would receive a grant, but they're going to be under pressure, he said. And asked whether he would like the Morrison government to relax the 6-month requirement, Langfeller said giving builders an extra 6 months to start projects would take the pressure off a little bit. Because the cut-off is today, it won't cost the government any more, he said. All it will do is provide a little more certainty to those customers that they will actually get the grant that they were expecting. Langfeller's comments came as the Australian Bureau of Statistics revealed on Wednesday that building approvals for private sector houses hit another record in February, surpassing the previous record in December. ABS Director of Construction and Statistics Bill Becker said approvals for private sector houses had increased 15.1% in February and risen almost 70% since HomeBuilder was announced in June. And the HIA Chief economist Tim Reardon said the scheme had certainly been very successful in turning around what was a very terrible outlook for home building in June of last year. From the day HomeBuilder was announced, we saw the market turn dramatically, Reardon said, but he conceded it would take longer than usual for builders to complete their projects due to supply shortages, while Mr. Eadie said the supplies that were making it through to Australia were of low quality. It's terrible. We haven't got any decent timber left, Eadie said. The timber is arriving wet and therefore can't be installed in a house until it's dry, or there will be mould issues, added Jared Bailey, a builder with 23 years' experience. This is delaying a lot of builders. Now, the New Daily asked the Office of Housing Minister Michael Sukkar if the government was considering extending HomeBuilder's 6-month deadline. It did not respond before they went to press. But Sukkar has acknowledged separately that borrowers currently bear, quote, limited responsibility for providing incorrect information on loans, highlighting the need to change lending laws. So here we go, the spruiking trying to get responsible lending removed. Speaking in the opening address to the informal Responsible Lending Summit earlier this week, Assistant Treasurer and MP for Deakin Michael Sukkar emphasised the need for lending law changes to help make loan writing more efficient and increase borrower responsibility. Sukkar, who is also a Minister of Housing and Minister of Homelessness, Social and Community Housing, told delegates that the repeal of the responsible lending obligations under the proposed credit reforms would not only reduce the prescription of the principles and obligations on lenders and borrowers alike, but also help raise consumer awareness around their own obligations when taking out loans and make them more accountable. Providing context for the changes, Sukkar said that whilst the responsible lending obligations were originally intended to be a risk-based principles framework that was scalable relative to the individual and product, over time the principles had been layered with increased guidance from regulators to culminate in a regime that many would say is overly prescriptive, complex and onerous on consumers seeking timely access to credit, he said. The National Consumer Credit Protection Act 2009 introduced a requirement that all lenders must not provide unsuitable loans. However, what was developed in practice since then is a rigid and inflexible system that has frustrated many consumers and lenders alike, impeding prospective and good borrowers from much-needed credit because of their granular spending habits, rather than their ability to service a loan, he said. This is clearly visible in the prescriptive RLO guidance and the response by lenders to be overly cautious in their credit assessments. To meet their obligations under the Act, lenders have adopted a standardised credit assessment approach for most consumers and credit products, irrespective of individual circumstances. The unintended consequence is a one-size-fits-all regime. The question for lenders has become, can I lend, not should I lend? Ultimately, these processes do not necessarily improve a lender's ability to make an assessment on the suitability of credit for the customer, he said. And then the Assistant Treasurer went out to outline that the current regime had also resulted in significant delays in credit assessment, unreasonable waiting times and increasing borrowing costs. None of that is actually proven, by the way. Even existing mortgages faced delays, avoidable delays, to refinancing existing loans despite having a strong credit record. This rigid and inflexible system risks impeding our economic recovery of COVID-19 and is no longer fit for purpose, he said. Stating that credit is the lifeblood of our economy, he went on to outline that the government was therefore hoping to simplify Australia's credit framework. We're seeking a more efficient flow, and we're doing that by reducing the cost and time it takes consumers and businesses to access credit while ensuring that the right consumer protections are in place. The Assistant Treasurer also acknowledged that borrowers currently bear limited responsibility for providing incorrect information on loans, highlighting the need to change lending laws and increase accountability. He elaborated, now the onus is on lenders to verify information provided by borrowers who bear limited responsibility for providing incorrect or misleading information to lenders. The result is a detailed and lengthy credit approval process aimed solely at ensuring the lender doesn't breach the responsible lending obligations. The Assistant Treasurer told the Responsible Lending Summit that he believed that as lenders streamlined and improved their credit assessment processes, they would be able to rely on information provided by borrowers unless there are reasonable grounds to suspect it is unreliable. This means borrowers will be more accountable to provide accurate information to inform lending decisions, he said. After all, borrowers have the best insight and understanding of their information, and lenders should be able to trust borrowers and rely upon those disclosures. This does not override the need for a lender's normal checks and balances, such as verifying debt information from third parties, he continued, but recognises that the borrower knows the most about their own circumstances. And Sukkar went on to suggest that this would also be an important step in reducing the time for credit assessments to be conducted. However, Sukkar acknowledged that consumers cannot be expected to take greater responsibility if they're not fully informed of their own obligations. As such, he said that financial literacy education, highlighting public resources such as ASIC's Money Smart website, could help provide objective advice for consumers making important financial decisions. Since the new framework will make it clear that lenders can rely on information provided by borrowers, the information provided will also be considered by APRA in its assessment of cases. More generally, it would be even more important for consumers to increase their financial literacy and be empowered to make informed decisions. However, Sukkar also told delegates that it was important to balance access to credit with ensuring lending standards remain strong in order to protect the most vulnerable customers. He therefore emphasised that the financial complaints body, AFCA, would still be empowered to facilitate a fast, free and fair resolution for borrowers, and credit providers would still be obliged to be AFCA members and comply with their existing licensing obligations to act efficiently, honestly and fairly. The government understands that unnecessary barriers to accessing credit should be removed so consumers continue to spend, businesses can invest, jobs can be created, and our economy can continue its strong recovery from COVID-19, Sukkar said. That is why the Morrison government is moving to simplify the process to reduce waiting times and the costs of accessing credit and ensure lenders continue to lend, he said. These reforms are about providing more timely and less costly credit to those Australians who can afford it. The fact is, removing burdensome, unnecessary obligations on lenders to make it easier and faster to lend money or extend credit limits is in the best interest of consumers, small businesses and the broader economy. Will benefit from economic growth. And he concluded, now more than ever, it's critical that unnecessary barriers to accessing credit are removed so that consumers can continue to invest in their future and businesses can fund their growth and create jobs. Well, what a load of rhubarb, frankly. Just make this point. Many consumers are not in a position to make those sorts of decisions on their own. They need help, they need advice, and they rely on banks to help them with an assessment. So by putting all of the acid back on individuals and getting banks effectively off scot-free completely changes the power relationship with regard to lending. The other point I'd make is that there is no evidence proven so far that these responsible lending laws have slowed down credit assessment processes. Most of that is due to the poor internal processes within organisations. If they were properly digitised, the whole process could be much, much quicker. So essentially, the government is through the back door and basically using COVID-19 and the economic recovery as an excuse, trying to tilt the playing field massively towards banks, away from consumers. This must not be allowed to stand. It is wrong, it is disgraceful, but of course the government keeps spruiking it. Be interesting to see what happens in May, when in fact it comes back into the Parliament. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.